well, as I said, our first preference is that the pipeline gets stopped, but our next preference is if we're going to do it, let's make sure we do it right. And then finally, I do think that the fact that the EPA responded the way they did is in part a reflection of the kinds of comments that people made. And I believe there are over 100,000 comments. Is that accurate? And I think that's an indication that citizen involvement can have an impact. So I would encourage you to stay involved and keep involved. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. We're going to go right into questions. I'll ask one from online, and then I'll ask one from the room. We'll kind of rotate that way. So the first one comes from Jacqueline. She sent it in via email, and she wants to know why is the pipeline being laid across the continent when the capacity to refine oil is available in Canada or in northern states? Paul, do you want to take that one?
Sure. The thing to remember about pipeline transportation systems and refining systems is that typically the cheapest way to get product or oil to markets is by shipping the crude oil as far as you can to refinery, and have the refinery be as close as it can be to the markets. And that's because if you ship crude oil, you only have one pipeline. If you ship product out of a refinery, diesel fuel, gasoline, things called pentanes and other kinds of products, you need a separate pipeline typically for each of those products. So the number of pipelines coming out of a refinery is much larger than the number going in. So it's a lot cheaper to build one pipeline a long distance to a refinery and then have a bunch of smaller, shorter pipelines going out to the cities near that refinery. That's why refineries are mostly scattered around, except for the ones on the Gulf Coast. You see them around big cities typically, rather than out in the countryside. So, you know, the reason that they don't want to, the economics of why they don't refine in Canada are pretty complicated. But, you know, they would rather ship the crude oil down to the U.S. and have it refined there than refine it in Canada and have gasoline pipelines coming down and diesel pipelines and a whole bunch of different kinds of pipelines. Also, they've got a lot of sunk infrastructure in the United States. There's a lot of refineries here. They want to keep those refineries going for as long as possible, and making as much product as possible. And they don't want to build new refineries in Canada, then have to abandon refineries down in the U.S. I think those are some of the reasons. There are probably other ones too.
How about a question from the audience?
Where will the pipes be manufactured, and what will be the strength of that pipe?
That's a great question. I know Paul's organization just did a report on this, and so Paul, you want to answer that, and then maybe some other folks from the panel chime in.
Sure. We have a report. I put some things out. We don't have a copy for everybody in the room about the potential for a use of low-strength steel in the first Keystone pipeline. And just so you know, the steel for that pipe came from an Indian manufacturer. The steel, we're not sure where the steel came from. The steel comes from a different place than where it's made into a pipe. In terms of the Keystone XL pipeline, our understanding is that the same Indian company, Wellspun, is going to be producing at least some of the pipe for the Keystone XL pipeline, but we don't know where the steel for that pipe will be made. We haven't figured that out yet. We think that the public should know where the source of the steel for that pipeline is and where the pipe will be manufactured. You know, some countries don't have as high quality standards as other countries, and you know, it turns out that our report shows pretty conclusively for the Keystone or for other pipelines made in other parts of the country that Wellspun provided a substantial amount of substandard pipe to other pipe manufacturers. We don't know if it did that for the Keystone pipeline or not. We asked for the federal government to investigate that and to report on whether where the steel for the Keystone XL, the Keystone 1 pipeline came from, and whether any of it's defective. So we don't really know yet, but that's one of the questions we have to ask is, well, where are you getting your not only the pipe, but where's the steel coming from? Because you can take steel slabs and turn it into pipe anywhere, but the steel, one of the biggest problems with that weakness of the pipe that's been made in the past was that the steel chemistry was bad. This is very high strength pipe. This is very high tech pipe, and if the standards for this pipe are off by even small amounts, it can be substantially weaker than it's supposed to be. It's really very, very specialized, a manufacturing process, and you don't want sloppy steel mills making this pipe. It's making the steel for you.
This question comes from Twitter, and so Marty, I'll throw this one to you, and anybody else can kind of chime in as well. I do want to say that we do have Paul's Plains Justice report that he was just referring to on the Bold Nebraska resource page. So all of that information is kind of all in one place. So Marty, how do they thin the heavy crude oil so it will flow through the pipe?
Well, what they basically use is, it comes into the processing plant. They will then crate it down using hot water to thin it out, okay, and they add chemicals. With that then, the chemicals and the waste goes into the tailings ponds. Then they end up adding dilutants, the chemicals that Paul kind of talked about earlier. The benzenes, known human carcinogens and stuff like that, that are going to be going through these with the oil to basically make it processed through. Like with the Alberta Clipper, there's another pipeline that came with it. There was the Alberta Clipper, but then there's also a 20-inch pipe called the Southern Lights diluent line. That was basically the line that was bringing the diluents from the refineries down in Illinois back up to Canada to be put back into the oils so they can reuse it again. So basically what they use is, to make 1 barrel of oil, they use anywhere from 2.5 to 4 barrels of water to process that out. As Paul stated earlier, it's very energy inefficient. They use enough natural gas there to heat 3 million homes a year, just for one product. When you look at that and you look at where they get it from, where you get the natural gas to do all the steam work and to process it down, they basically steam it and they make it flow. Where they get this from then is the North Slope of Alaska. And that's where there's a new pipeline being built from the North Slope of Alaska down to Edmonton to help process all this. This pipeline is supposed to come down to the United States with a stopover in Edmonton to process out the oil. So,
Jane, if I may,
Sure.
the actual diluent is a paint thinner called naphtha, and that is a high-grade paint thinner for industrial paint for automobiles, tractors, and trucks. And it is explosive and also carcinogenic.
And it's one of the concerns that folks have, because when a leak happens, it's not only the tar sands oil that leaks out of the pipe, it's all of these chemicals as well.
if I could also, on the National Wildlife Federation, the people here in the room have this. I don't know where the camera's at. The picture here is actually in northern Minnesota. This is like 10 miles from my house. This happened in like 2005, 2006, I want to say. 2 workers were working on the pipeline. They were fixing a repair and putting on new pipe and stuff. This is actually the 3rd time that they had been to that spot to work on it. First 2 times obviously didn't take, it was still leaking. As you can see, there's snow on the ground. It was actually like around 0 that day, if I remember right. So it was kind of cold for people to be working outside. So instead of, they're down in a hole like 10 feet deep doing some welding and stuff like that, their truck was sitting up on top of the ground. And they had a tarp over it to try and keep some heat in for them. Well, what it did was the fumes and stuff, the carcinogens and benzene and everything else like that, the fumes built up, went up, hit a spark in the engine, and that's what caused the explosion. Unfortunately, in that instance, the pipeline industry put that down as human error, that it was the workers' fault that they died. So just a little tidbit on this little information, and yes, it is very flammable. When there's a tank farm in northern Minnesota, in Kleeb, Minnesota, not far from where this happened, when the people go up to check the tank farms to see how full the tanks are, which hold like 1 million gallons or 1 million barrels of oil in each one, they have to go up there with hazmat suits on, with respirators, or else they could actually pass out and die checking the tanks. That's how much oil and smell there is up there. What everyone says is, you smell that at the gas stations. You smell that at the gas stations, but not at those type of rates. When you look at the cancer rates even in America, the cancer alley down in Houston, Texas, anywhere east of the refineries, it's considered cancer alley. There's high rates of cancers there. When you look at the Exxon Valdez, when they went and did the cleanup on Exxon Valdez, most of the people that helped do the volunteer work ended up dying from cancers. When you watch the news and you see people down in the Gulf Coast, you see them with only rubber gloves on, handling raw oils. You know, and what I've heard is that they even have to sign waivers so they won't sue BP for something happens later on. So, very dangerous. Oil is very dangerous in any form.
Question right up here.
How do they maintain that high temperature along the length of the pipeline to keep the flow consistent and going?
Duane, do you want to take that one?
I don't know.
In northern Minnesota, basically they use, it's not heated anymore. It's just the force of it going through will keep it moving.
All the chemicals.
Yeah, and that and the chemicals in it. But if you walk the pipeline route in the summer or in the springtime, directly above the pipelines is where the snow melts the first.
When they process in Canada, it's pretty hot. And it's a very large mass of moving material, and so a lot of it, the warmth stays there. Also, the force of the pump when you're working on the oil with those kinds of under that pressure and that kind of pumping, it increases the temperature of the oil. But it does vary depending on where you are, just like the pressure varies in different parts of the pipeline too.
If you increase the pressure that much, you're going to increase the temperature.
Right.
It's going to stay hot because of the pressure.
Yep.
To give an example of the propulsion steam propulsion that drives the guided missile cruiser is at 600 pounds per square inch as opposed to 1,500 pounds per square inch. That's really high pressure. That's going to keep it hot.
This question is for Ernie, and it actually comes from somebody in Texas who emailed it in wanting a fellow landowner to answer it. So he says it's his understanding that until a presidential permit is issued and it's determined that a pipeline is in the national interest, TransCanada has no entitlement to eminent domain, even in the states that have approved the project through the Public Utilities Commission. What course of action might I have against TransCanada when they falsely represented to me in 2008, both written and verbally, that they had the power of eminent domain as well as the presidential permit?
Good question. They don't have, TransCanada does not have eminent domain powers now. And they probably aren't going to get them because this pipe, to get eminent domain, you have to have something for the better good of the public. And this is not addressing the better good of the public because the stuff is going to China. He needs to talk to an eminent domain lawyer and get on board with one and find out where they're going down there in Texas, because Texas, I think, canceled their eminent domain law federally quite a few years ago, and I don't think they currently have one in the state. They might. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know, but if he has a question like that, he needs to talk to a lawyer, because once they use that eminent domain on you, you don't have much time to do anything. We're researching that in Nebraska right now, and we think we found some loopholes, but we're not sure.
Thanks, Ernie. We'll take a question right up here.
I understood